Welcome to the Gems of Google Earth, a series where I uncover some of the most fascinating and oftentimes overlooked satellite images and the stories they tell. In this video, we're going to explore sub-Saharan Africa. Let's start off with the Okavango Delta in the nation of Botswana. Now, just looking at the satellite image is simply stunning. You see this incredibly arid desert environment surrounding this lush delta. But unlike most deltas, it doesn't flow into any major body of water, let alone an ocean. It just spreads out into the desert. Keep in mind that the desert surrounding it is some of the most inhospitable in the world, yet this Okavango Delta produces some of the greatest sources of biodiversity on the planet. The Kalahari Desert to the west is incredibly dry, and it is not particularly conducive for megafauna, let alone human life. Yet, because of this river and the swamplands that surround it, you now have some of the most incredible biodiversity of hippos, rhinos, giraffes, and other iconic African wildlife. Now you might be wondering, where is the source of all of this water since it's in the desert? And it actually, in fact, originates from the highlands of Angola. The river flows southwards and ends up in Botswana, spreading out into the aforementioned delta. If you ever have the privilege of visiting this region, make sure to know whether you're coming in the wet or the dry season, as the biome changes substantially. Oftentimes when you go on a safari during the wet season, you will see a lot more vegetation, a lot more beautiful vistas, but it might be harder to see some of the animals due to the dense foliage. In the dry season, the biome, the scenery, the vistas may not be as beautiful, but you will have better access to viewing animals. What makes the Okavango Delta even more unique is that, in sharp contrast to most other safaris, this one can be seen by boat. Next on the list is a place that I've been to personally and is arguably the coolest place in the world if you want to see wildlife, and that's the Ngorongoro Crater in Tanzania. Some people even refer to it as the Garden of Eden. What basically happened was you had a volcano the size of Mount Kilimanjaro that had exploded and had created a caldera as a result. After enough time, vegetation would grow from the volcanic ash, and there would be a small saltwater pond in the middle of it. In this gigantic crater, you would eventually have a perpetual wet season, in sharp contrast to the Serengeti and the surrounding savannas and deserts that are nearby the Ngorongoro Crater, which fluctuate in their vegetation and life depending on the season. The Ngorongoro Crater is really verdant all year round, and this leads us to having the highest rate of megafauna density on the entire planet. What's even cooler is that a lot of the male elephants who reach the ripe old age and survive to that long eventually migrate from the Serengeti to the Ngorongoro Crater just to chill and enjoy their retirement. Next on the list is the Oldi Gorge, or the Oldi Gorge. This, like the Ngorongoro Crater, is found in northeastern Tanzania. After all, northeastern Tanzania is incredibly vast in its natural and archaeological history. Now, if you just look at the satellite image or even photographs, this area just looks like some typical arid canyon. But what makes it so unique is that it is arguably the birthplace of our genus. Not just species like Homo sapiens, but the genus of Homo, as the earliest remnants of Homo habilis were found here. Now, human evolution is incredibly complex, and one could argue that human evolution does not place its origins in one particular area, but rather a vast stretch of areas, and time for that matter. But nonetheless, the Oldi Gorge is the richest when it comes to anthropological evidence, and has played a key role in our understanding of ourselves. Next on the list is in a country to the north of Tanzania and Kenya for that matter, and I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation, but bear with me. Dalol. Now, I've never been here, but it looks really cool. It's in northeastern Ethiopia, very close to Eritrea, and it is quite possibly the closest Earth gets to hell. Which I guess doesn't make it that cool, but it at least looks cool. The primary reason for this is that not only is it rich in volcanic and geothermal activity, but it is also very rich in sulfur, iron, and salt. Sulfur is a very peculiar element as it is incredibly beautiful with its yellow hue, but it also smells like, well, shit. And the vast deposits of sulfur create lots of yellow and even some orange and green here and there. What's also remarkable is the intense heat, as the temperatures oftentimes exceed 4 degrees Celsius, or if you're using Murica units, 100 Fahrenheit. So next on the list is not so much one particular location, but rather a material that is used for building that is very common in sub-Saharan Africa that creates this very shiny effect. Now, if you look at various images of African cities from Google Earth, whether it's Kinshasa or say Mombasa or elsewhere, you'll see a lot of shininess, and you might be wondering why. Well, the answer for this is corrugated iron. Corrugated iron is very common in sub-Saharan Africa due to its utility, as it basically keeps you safe from the rain and, to an extent, excessive heat. And on top of that, it's cheap. It may not be the prettiest raw material, but it gets the job done. And as a result of this, in many parts of Africa, you see corrugated iron being used. The stereotypical images of the African huts with thatched roofs really don't exist in any significant manner. You are far more likely to see shiny, silvery huts, which, while not being the most luxurious, do create this very shiny hue when it comes to the satellite images you see. It's pretty spectacular, and if you ever manage to drive at a distance from these places, the shining lights can oftentimes be blinding. Next on the list is the Great Zimbabwe National Monument. There is a misconception that peoples of sub-Saharan Africa never produced their own indigenous civilizations. This is by and large a BS move made up by Arabs and later Europeans to deny Africans of their own unique history. Even those of us who are more familiar with African history will probably point to those of West Africa and Timbuktu, but many of them are also unaware that Southern Africa produced its own complex cities as well, as seen in Zimbabwe. Many Europeans who traveled to this area made up all sorts of BS archaeological explanations, claiming that the ancient Phoenicians or Greeks somehow set up this city, but alas, it was ancient Africans using large granite blocks without mortar to produce these spectacular monuments. Next on the list is Lake Malawi. This is one of Africa's great freshwater lakes. Now, Africa's great freshwater lakes are rather similar to the great freshwater lakes of North America, being that they are giant and filled with fresh water, but these reside in tropical climates, which make for far greater biodiversity. Now, unlike Lake Victoria, which is probably more important in the sense that it is one of the sources of the Nile River, Lake Malawi is more interesting in biodiversity, as it's home to the cichlids, these fish that have some of the greatest forms of differentiation between various species in the genus. To this day, cichlids are some of the most common fish in the pet trade. And it's amazing that one lake could produce such remarkable diversity, even though just by looking at the satellite image, you wouldn't be aware of it. It looks like any other large freshwater lake. Next on the list are the pyramids. And no, I'm not talking about the pyramids of Egypt, but rather the pyramids of the country south of Egypt in Sudan. Now, technically, these are still in the Sahara, but whether or not Sudan truly counts as a North African nation or a sub-Saharan African nation is up for debate. It's really part of the Sahel region, which I'm going to get to in a moment. Despite being overshadowed by its far more famous northern neighbor, the region of what is now Sudan did produce a great deal of sophisticated archaeological sites, namely the Nubian pyramids. After all, the cultural and population diffusion from the north eventually created a quasi-similar culture to the south. But these pyramids are rather unique. Rather than having a large, broad base, these by and large tend to be taller and more narrow than their Egyptian counterparts. Unfortunately, the Nubians by and large are not part of your typical social studies education, but I'd love to see more emphasis being played on them. Perhaps it would break the bullshit spell that Africans did not produce their own indigenous cultures and civilizations. Now let's move on to the next subject on our list, and really the last one, the Sahel. Now, the Sahel is really part of the last place I discussed, and it's really not one particular place, but rather a gigantic swath of places. The Sahel translates into the shore from Arabic into English. This is because the Sahara Desert was seen as an ocean. After all, humans couldn't live in it, and it was incredibly desolate, so it kind of acted like an ocean. And throughout much of human history, sub-Saharan Africa was blocked off from a great deal of commerce, transportation, travel, and the exchange of goods, people, and ideas, in large part due to this desert. Nonetheless, this does create a number of really spectacular satellite images as you see the transition from the arid world of the north to the lush, verdant world of the south. The more Islamic-inspired world of the north with the more Christian and indigenous-inspired world of the south. The more Arab and Berber world of the north with the more truly African area of the south. And that is my story of some of the coolest images from Google Earth from sub-Saharan Africa. In my next video, we're going to be covering the Indian subcontinent. Stay tuned.